Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's live content UX audit. So, I think I kind of messed up some of the timing here. I scheduled this right before going on vacation, so definitely had vacation brain, I think, because I put it on LinkedIn and I think it said that it was happening at like 12 Mountain Standard Time, and then I'm looking at Ecamm Live and it's saying that I actually scheduled it for 1:30 and usually it's at 1. So anyway, very sorry. Hopefully this doesn't disrupt anyone's plans who was planning to. Okay, having some major technical errors today. So I'm sorry if you were just kicked off or whatever, if you had joined me and it did something. I'm just trying to see if my streaming is working because I'm doing it a little bit earlier than I had accidentally scheduled it for a slightly later time. So I'm actually not sure that this is streaming right now. But we might just have to go ahead with it anyway. And I will obviously share this recording with everybody after the fact, but it's upsetting when stuff doesn't work the way that you want it to. I think it's because I messed up the time that it usually is. I scheduled it for a different time, and so I went early. And anyway, I don't know if anybody can see this, but I guess by the time I'm done, I'll be able to post it at the time that it was supposed to happen anyway. So, just holding out a little bit of hope that this is working, but I just don't think that there's much else I can do right now. So, anyway, we'll just go ahead and do this as a recording then instead of as a streaming. And if anybody joins me, I'll look out to see if that's working. Okay, so today, I just got back from a trip, so, feeling refreshed and coming in with a little bit of a new perspective about the world, about content. And what I wanted to do today for my live, or maybe not live, content UX audit is a blog for a tool called LineLeader. And so let me go ahead and put that on the screen. So LineLeader is an app that, for example, child care centers would use this. And it's a tool that they use to basically communicate with parents during the day, as well as you can handle like billing stuff. You can communicate with the teachers and things like that. And as somebody who's a newer mom, it's nice to have, just like a good system for knowing what's up with my kid during the day. And one of the things that I really like about LineLeader is that you kind of get like a feed of activities. So it's not necessarily notifying you every time there's a new update, but you can kind of look back and see what happened throughout the day. It's a nice summary of just everything, the food, the playtime, the naps, the diaper changes, whatever. And so then by the time we pick up our child at the end of the day, we can just, kind of pick up where we left off. We know if he needs a new bottle, if he needs a new diaper, etc. So anyway, as somebody who has used LineLeader as a user, as a parent, I was curious to see what their content operation was like, and I noticed that they have some PPC ads running on LinkedIn. So they're definitely a sophisticated organization when it comes to the different pieces of digital marketing and how they all work together. So I just randomly picked this blog that you see here in front of you, 5 Ways LineLeader Helps Childcare CMOs Exceed Their Marketing Goals. So I like just to start how targeted this is. It feels like it's speaking to like a very specific, type of person, type of role. And, going through, you can see some elements of branding and cohesiveness with that branding throughout. I do have some thoughts in terms of how they're using visuals and, potentially how they could be using visuals more to support the brand more. One thing I really did want to say at the beginning here was I've noticed some chatter on LinkedIn over the past couple days about people who do like teardowns of other people's work. And I just want to make a distinction that that's not what I'm trying to do here. I'm not trying to tear anybody down, any person, any brand. what I'm really trying to do is just talk about the content experience as a whole. What it's like coming into these different websites, these different content experiences as a user, and trying to give you the background as I did in terms of like being a user of this app. So that's kind of where I'm coming at it, in addition to being a content professional. But the whole idea of like tearing down other people's work is not one that resonates with me. So I hope that you'll agree that the goal here is for us all to learn something and to do it in a very respectful way. If it ever feels like that's not what's happening, I would love that feedback so that I can make adjustments. And I'll also note that I will be doing another live content UX audit actually as a webinar for Green Geeks. I believe it's October 16th. It's midday. I'll be posting the link once that's live so that you can sign up, and you can also submit your content for consideration there as well. That's something that I forgot to say at the beginning, is that I'll just push this back here. If you'd like to submit your content for a very respectful audit, not tear down, then you can use this blogsmith.tips/content UX, and it's just a short form that basically asks for your name and for the content, and then if you would like to add any additional details to that. Okay, so let's get to kind of the main point of today, which is the content UX audit. So like I said, I think that the title itself does a great job of kind of speaking to a very specific audience. Like, I know if this is for me or not. And as kind of more of this like parent user that I've already described, like this piece is not written for me, right? But we will audit it because that's what we're here to do. So the first thing that kind of stood out to me about this was I wasn't in love with the intro, and it was because there were parts of it that read, I guess, similarly to like robotically generated content. Whether it was or not, what I want to point out are a couple of things for you to keep in mind when you're writing. This whole like ever-evolving landscape, I think most content writers see that and kind of grown nowadays, but I think we've all been guilty too of like using that same language back in the day. Otherwise, where would tools such as ChatGPT have gotten that and made that into like a refrain? And again, I'm not saying that that's what happened here. I'm saying that there are certain phrases like that like intentionally or not, they kind of put people in a mindset, I guess, that you maybe don't want them to be, that you don't want them to be thinking that way. So for this, I think it's just adjusting some of the language and being aware of the things that do sound robotic, those sorts of like turns of phrase that are common with tools like ChatGPT and other generative AI tools. Another thing that struck me about this intro too was the use of the word fortunately. And so in this case, in this piece, LineLeader is really trying to position themselves as this tool, that's going to be really useful to CMOs, because that, at least what I can read from what I'm seeing here, it's like that's the audience they're trying to appeal to get this tool. Probably the goal is to get it in like major franchises of daycares. And so the CMO of these daycare franchises would be a great person to appeal to, and then to, adopt it throughout the many different franchises and things like that. So yeah, they're saying like, fortunately, LineLeader's here to help you. So we actually have something in the Blogsmith style guide about this, because this is another thing that like I've seen writers write a lot. I personally do it until I catch myself doing it. And so the way that we describe it, and first of all, here's the Blogsmith style guide. You can access this by going to theblogsmith.com/content-style-guide, or you can find it under our resources, I think. Yes. So let me just go ahead. You can kind of browse through and see the different chapters and how we handle different issues of style, but I remembered that we did address this specifically. And so this is just from the style guidance point of view. Words like thankfully, fortunately, luckily, actually, in other words, or of course, they just don't really add value. And so what I would do instead is maybe use something like a bucket brigade. It's just something that breaks up text. It kind of adds some blank space, above and below and kind of to the side of it. And if you're just kind of looking for a transition word, that works. But even that, like good news, fortunately, thankfully, it just kind of doesn't have a specific meaning unless you're saying, you know, like, fortunately we were able to donate all this, like, you know, relief money or something like that. It's like it has to make sense within the context of the sentence. And for, I don't know, a CMO, a childcare CMO, I don't know if this is fortunate to them or not. I'm kind of like waxing poetic here, I guess, a little bit, but it's like, it's kind of like, know your audience and don't make assumptions in general. And like, whether you mean to or not, saying a word like fortunately is kind of making an assumption as to what that person would think is fortunate. So yeah, a long-winded response, but hopefully that's useful. The next thing, and one of, I think, the main things that I wanted to get across with this article in particular is just the idea of consistency in formatting. So a couple things that are inconsistent. First of all, the casing of the subheadings here. So this is, I'm going to mess it up, title case. So every word in the sentence and the sentence fragment is capitalized. But then the next one isn't. And then the next one is. And then the next one is. And then the next one isn't. So even the inconsistencies are kind of inconsistent here. And that's just something that I don't know that most people would notice that. It's something that my eye catches because, well, my background in web design combined with the content stuff, I just kind of like look at all the details, I guess, and the style itself. And I think, and I've said this before on one of these lives, or not lives as it is today, but just like the idea that things are, even if you can't percept it, the idea that things are inconsistent, I think it's like a subconscious reaction you have to that. And ultimately, I think consistency is really like the foundation and cornerstone of branding. And consistency leads to trust. People buy from those they know, like, and trust. And so I'm trying to paint a picture here that it is important at the end of the day, even if it is hard to consciously percept. That wasn't the only example of inconsistency, though. The next one is probably just like a style guide, some sort of confusion here in terms of like what styles the blog should use versus like maybe the rest of the website. So this is another thing that is probably barely perceptible to the average person who's not involved in content or design. But if we go and we inspect the elements here, so this one, like the body copy, you can see here that the font size is 16 points, okay? But to my eye, this link text next to it looks just a little bit bigger. But let's go ahead and double check here. So if we go down, I can't see it now, but let's see. Maybe I need to go to the span itself. Because you can kind of see it's like inheriting some styles. Like that one says 16, but the link itself is actually 18 points. So here it is. And you can see because it's like the href. So that's the link itself. So it's 18 points for that one. And again, I think that's probably just like some style rules maybe got mixed up between different pages on the website. But again, it's one of those things where it's like, you almost can't tell, but it just looks a little funky, and it's probably a pretty quick fix overall. Let's go ahead and look at the sidebar just as part of the content experience. It's something that I usually comment on, so I'll give you my thoughts as to this one in particular. Okay, sorry, I was jumping around because I was trying to see, there was an example, and I don't know if it was on this page, where they have all these enter your email address, but one of them had something like example@email.com. And I was going to say, I thought that it was maybe an opportunity to like do something cute with it. You know, like I've seen, I don't know, I'm trying to think of an example. There's one where somebody used like a Game of Thrones character. It should be something that's like on brand to who you are and what you do. But that was something that I thought, wherever I saw it, you know, better than just saying like example, have a little bit of fun with it. One thing that I usually say about these email sign up calls to action is like, it kind of needs a little bit of something, you know, some sort of like urgency driver, some sort of social proof factor, something that compels me to sign up for email. So they kind of list more or less what you could expect here. And one thing that I'm just noticing too here is they are not using an Oxford comma, and I'm just wondering if that's consistent throughout the copy as well. I am pro team Oxford comma. I think without it, a sentence loses essential meaning. But there are brands that we work with at the Blogsmith that have a completely different opinion about that. And so as long as it's consistent, either way is fine. But yeah, I was going to say, so they kind of list what you could expect, but it's things like, well, how many other people are subscribed, or what types of people, is it CMOs, that usually subscribe here? Is it, like bigger or smaller businesses? That might be too much to get into here, but it's just like, I'm not maybe getting enough of a sense of why I should do it, and so I'm not going to do it. But it seems to be an important call to action because they have it up at the top here in the sidebar. They have subscribe to the blog down here. They have, enter your email address down here, and they also have it in their footer. So that's maybe another thing too worth mentioning here that's kind of outside of the blog post itself, but just this content experience. So I've just pointed out, I think, 4 email newsletter sign up calls to action. We also have this get a demo down here in orange, and then we have it at the top. And then we also have at the very top of the page, we have a welcome bar to complete a benchmark survey. And so ultimately what I would say is I feel like there may be too many competing calls to action, specifically on this blog page. I'm sure it looks different on other pages that you would look at, but that's something where it might make sense to pare some of these down, or like ultimately what is the most important call to action. And maybe it changes blog per blog. It probably should change blog per blog. So like this benchmark survey, I'm not sure exactly who they're trying to target. I would assume that ECE means early childhood educators. But again, if this blog is about CMOs and that's not who they're trying to target here, like maybe that doesn't show up on pages where you're targeting this particular persona, right? Again, just it's extra work, right? To have to set like rules where it's going to show up somewhere and then not. But with how many different CTAs are competing for attention, and it, and really probably the most important one being to try a demo or to otherwise start using the tool. That would be my suggestion, would just to kind of personalize it for the persona itself. Okay. The other thing that I wanted to say, now that I've jumped around, and before I say that, actually, I want to go back to the sidebar, I think, for one more thing. This is a common thing. I think we're guilty of this on the Blogsmith, too. So they have kind of like related posts. They have like a preview of the next, or, like things in a similar subject matter area. Again, common issue is you want to kind of optimize your preview text. You want to know what the character count is. You want to set a limit, and then you want to stick within that. And so usually if you're using something like WordPress, for example, there's like an excerpt feature. And sometimes that excerpt feature actually is just like your meta description. So all I'm really trying to say here is know what that limit is and stick to it. And then you won't have things that get cut off because it just doesn't look great. And again, I think we are just as guilty of this at the Blogsmith, but do as I say, not as I do. Okay, so what I was going to say is going back to the table of contents, I started to talk about this idea of like consistency, and consistency within like similar elements. So like if you have a list, it's like, does that list all kind of, does it all make sense together? So if you could imagine this was a bullet list of sentences, do they all have a period at the end? Do they all start with a capital letter? Are they all about the same length? So the other thing to think about too is how they kind of work in a list. So the article itself, and I know we have something about this in the Blogsmith style guide. I'll see if I can find it right after this. The article itself is 5 ways LineLeader helps childcare CMOs, ... And so you can imagine each one of these is a point. It helps them streamline marketing automation, centralize lead management, enhance brand experience. It helps them with data-driven insights, and it helps them elevate enrollment forecasting. So I said those the way that I would expect to see them, but as you can see, there's things like streamlined, it's ED. enhance, ed. So what I'm trying to say is when you are kind of like answering whatever like the promise of the title is with like your list in kind, you want to make sure that it kind of has a flow, right? And that ultimately it's consistent, because some of these are ed, some of these are just, they don't have like the past tense. And so that's the thing. That's pretty much all the things that I'm saying today are things that like I would work with an editor to fix that. I wouldn't necessarily count on myself to catch all those things, because it's just so easy. And I'm working on a LinkedIn Learning class right now, and I'm finishing like the end of the material, and I've started to go back to the beginning to make sure that everything is consistent. And what I've noticed is at the end, for example, I've written in sentence case on the slides, but the old slides were all in title case. So that's just one example of something that kind of came up during edits, but also like it took me a while to catch that for myself. And so that's the point that I'm trying to make, is that like we're all human. It's really easy to make these mistakes. I still make these mistakes, but I think that working with an editor who has these rules very clearly defined and part of their process will definitely help. Okay, what else did I want to say about this? Let me see if I could find the part of the style guide that talks a little bit about the consistency with subheadings specifically. Maybe this was it. Look for, no, this is not it. I think it was the next one. Here's kind of an example. Match up your bullet points and headings. If your title or heading is about what to avoid, the subheading shouldn't be phrased as things you should do. It's not the exact rule that I wanted to find. But there are several useful pieces of advice here. I'm probably not going to find the one that I'm looking for, which is about, and I don't know if I've fully defined it here, but just that idea of like, it's kind of like answering, you know, the title itself. I know I had an example of it somewhere, like a list to show what that looks like. But anyway, it's in here somewhere, so just look around for it if you're curious about that. Okay, so I'm just seeing if there's anything else that I wanted to bring up. I think the last big thing was the images themselves. So this is like my constant thing, is I just don't feel like stock photos add value. I would rather not have a photo than have a stock photo, because they're just not distinctive of any particular brand, especially if you haven't done anything to change them. So that's just a note in general. I know plenty of companies do it, so it's not like this company is standing out for that in particular. It's more just for the sake of saying it. And then, so they do have some images here, and as you can see, they've like started to incorporate some aspects of branding. And we're starting to get into some aspects of like product-led content here too, where we're talking about how LineLeader actually works. I think the main thing that I feel like is missing from this article is really more of that. And the best way that I could describe it is by likening it to like a business book. So a lot of people have a hard time. They struggle to read business nonfiction because some writers, they kind of are just like matter of fact. Here's what I know. I'm sharing it. There it is. I enjoy business books, or maybe the easiest ones for me to read and act on are those that give examples, and they kind of put it in context for you. And that's something too that I really tried to do with the Blogsmith style guide, is not just giving a rule, but showing you what to do versus what not to do. And my book expands on that as well. The style guide, it starts to get to that, but the book like really expands on the what to do versus what not to do. And so there's so many mentions here in terms of how LineLeader specifically works. And again, I know about it from the parent user side. I don't necessarily know about it from like the back end side. Like they talk about, you know, let's see here, surveys and reviews with families, like dealing with leads, like new families that are coming to that daycare, understanding like data and things like that. I think there's maybe a lost opportunity here to do more to showcase the product itself, and they started to with these images, but putting it into more context. So yeah, like where they talk about data, like maybe showing some dashboards and saying, you know, this is such and such, you know, daycare or franchise or whatever, and, you know, this is the specific report you're seeing, and here's what they did with that. And they don't have to explain, you know, every single feature they mention, but I think if they took the time to do that for like one thing per heading, or even a couple things in this whole blog article, to me, for the CMO audience, I think that would appeal more than kind of these like quick descriptions where they're trying to fit a lot of details in. And, you know, without knowing kind of like their whole publishing schedule here, publishing calendar, and like what's already been published. Another thing that I would say, being blind of that, is like maybe there's some good opportunities here for some like follow-up content. You know, if there are certain things that like it doesn't make sense to get into in this particular piece of content, but if you could point somebody to something where they can learn more about those analytics features or like very specific use cases. The other thing I was going to say about the images is that they just didn't feel cohesive even with the branding. They feel like they're not part of the same set. And that's just my kind of like reaction without having a great way to explain it to you. But, you know, see what you think. See if you have the same conclusion. This is like a personal thing. I kind of like having a conclusion. We have clients that we work with who absolutely don't. But to me, it just feels like there's closure. It's like this is the end of, you know, point 5, and then this is like kind of just like we're summarizing the article, we're giving you any sort of like follow-ups, etc. Just seeing if there's anything else that was worth bringing up. I think that I've brought up, it was mostly stuff about the visuals, stuff about just consistency, things just being careful with word choice, lest they, you know, trigger a reaction in people that might not be fair. Like, this sounds like robotic content. You know, figuring out what to do with the CTAs, which ones are the highest priority, and which ones could, you know, maybe be personalized based on the persona that the certain page is targeting, and maybe just having less in general could beget better results. Again, this is something that I don't know without testing it, but these are just some thoughts. The last thing that I will say is they have an author bio at the end here, and I think it's great, and I think it does a great job of sharing like why Faith was the right person to write this article, her experience, her understanding of like how the tool works, but also her background in communication, experience in the childcare industry. We're missing a byline at the top though, and I think that that is going to continue to be very important as, you know, Google kind of pushes more for this EEAT focus, where you can really stand out with unique content when you have this experience to share, when you have specific experience to share. And so I think that that would also be a great addition here. So yeah, hopefully that was helpful to you. Hopefully it gave you something to think about. And again, I am going to be doing another one of these in 2 weeks for Green Geeks. I'll be doing these every 2 weeks or so for this LinkedIn audience when it decides to stream live. And you can submit your content for consideration for a future audit using this link. So I'm sorry that it didn't work out that this worked live, and I'm basically talking to myself and saying that because you'll watch it and it will be recorded. But such is life. All right. Have a good rest of your day. Bye.